Good evening, I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show. It is a pleasure to welcome to my studio Thaddeus McCotter, WJR, the great voice of the Great Lakes, a recovering politician. Thaddeus, a very good evening to you. Thank you for traveling to New York from Detroit, where you have a very good ball team doing well this year, unlike New York, where we're struggling with two challenged baseball teams. But we're moving on to a much bigger contest, which is the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy's Long War Journal. Bill Roggio joins now. We're going to begin in Afghanistan and then move very quickly to Syria, onto Iraq, because the war fighting continues, whether or not the British decide to leave Brussels. The jihadists, the cutthroats, the pirate crew of the collapsing Mesopotamian states are quite keen on pressing their advantage, and it's a considerable advantage. We begin in Afghanistan. Bill covers it very carefully. Bill, a very good evening to you. Taliban denies Ghazni shadow governor killed in airstrike. This is the sort of Roggio story that requires much explication. Ghazni shadow governor, what is that, and why is there dispute about this? After all, it was an airstrike. Good evening to you, Bill.
Good evening, John. Yes, the Afghan Ministry of Interior claimed that Mullah Mohammed Qasim was killed in an airstrike last week. The Taliban have vehemently denied this. They issued a statement actually the exact same day that the Afghan Interior Ministry made the claim. Ghazni is a very important province for the Taliban. You have the Taliban and Al-Qaeda that are based there. Bin Laden even said that Ghazni was one of the 4 provinces in Afghanistan that Al-Qaeda should flee to, as U.S. drones were stepping up airstrikes in Pakistan's tribal areas. And, you know, one of the things that I see a lot of reports from the Afghan military and the Afghan government claiming to have wild success against the Taliban, and the Taliban are quite keen to put these types of claims down. The Taliban will say, look, they're doing this for propaganda purposes. They're losing on the battlefield, and they're losing so badly they have to deny, or they have to claim that they killed someone when they did it.
That doesn't sound like propaganda to me, Bill.
Well, for the Taliban, it would be propaganda if indeed the person that they claim killed wasn't killed. For the Afghan government was claiming they killed someone they didn't.
Well, what I mean to say is that the Taliban looks like it's the truth teller in these exchanges.
Yes, right. The Taliban are saying the Afghan government is putting out propaganda by putting out false claims or propaganda to try to say, hey, look, we're doing better against the Taliban than what's really happened. And meanwhile, what is really happening in Afghanistan is you have the Taliban gaining ground throughout much of Afghanistan. I mean, the Afghan military and Afghan government are failing to beat back the Taliban assault, so much so that the U.S. government has changed tack and is now going to launch, or has begun to launch airstrikes against Taliban leadership or against Taliban formations that are operating, because, again, the Afghan Air Force can't do it. It's too little too late, though.
Bill, it's Thaddeus. The people of Afghanistan are well aware of the situation on the ground, correct? They know that this propaganda from the government is not going to do anything except incite, perhaps, or further consternate the Taliban, which seems to be winning.
Well, you know, so if you're in, let's say, in the Afghan north, you don't have a real good grip as to what's happening in the place southeastern Afghanistan and Ghazni. So if the government is going to claim that they killed a Taliban military leader, this is the kind of thing that, hey, you can either accept the government's claim or you can reject it. Now, it's difficult to reject something like that when you're not in the area, but when the Taliban come out and state it. But I think the Afghan people do have a really good handle on what the situation is inside Afghanistan and how well or how poorly the Afghan military and Afghan government are performing on the battlefield.
Before we move on to Syria, I want to confirm, Bill, that right now, the end of June 2016, the Taliban, in several iterations, it's not just one group, the Taliban is advancing. The morale is high. The Afghan army and the Afghan police are in retreat. The U.S. battle plan, if it exists, is not yet working, and the Afghan people are aware that they've got to make adjustments to who they're going to trust for the future. Is all that correct, Bill? I'm trying to be very diplomatic in general here.
Yes, it's a very diplomatic way to put it. That is correct, though. Yes.
All right, moving on to Syria. You have a report, your colleague Tom Jocelyn. 3 Russian soldiers allegedly killed when a roadside bomb exploded in northern Syria. This is a mock news agency. The way this report presents the facts, it calls into question whether that actually happened. So what we have here is another piece of propaganda that is not confirmed. Who benefits from this sort of propaganda? Is this Al-Qaeda, which sometimes works with us as al-Nusra? Is this the Islamic State, which sometimes doesn't work with us and works with our allies? Who is putting out 3 Russian soldiers? By the way, I mentioned that the Russian Defense Ministry, which is not trustworthy, denies that this happened.
Yeah, you're certainly going up with the battle of the untrustworthy here when you got a mock news agency, which is a news agency affiliated with, it's practically an official arm of the Islamic State on one side, claiming that 3 Russian soldiers were killed in an IED attack on a road in northern Syria. They claim that they had video of this, and they claim they got it from one of the dead soldiers, supposedly dead soldiers who were killed. How they would have a video of their own death is somewhat interesting. I guess what they're saying is that one of the soldiers took video at a different point in time. I don't know. It's a little confusing to me. But the Russians themselves have denied this. Remember, the Russians claim that they've halted military operations and withdrew its forces, and they've always claimed that they didn't have many ground troops inside Syria. We know that not to be true. So it's, this is one of those reports where at first glance you go, hey, that could be true. The Russians are denying it. We don't really know the answer. Could be true. I wouldn't be shocked if it was, and it could be a lie. I wouldn't be shocked if that was the case as well.
Bill, it's Thaddeus again. The question would be, is this video then designed is there a belief that they could help undermine any type of Russian support within the population itself for this type of action? Is Mr. Putin sensitive to this? I'm not saying that this is akin to the United States and Vietnam, but is that part of the goal for putting out a video like this, if it is indeed fake?
Yeah, I think that there's certainly several audiences here. Probably the first primarily being their followers. This is, throwing blood into the pool. The one thing that the jihadists in Syria would love to do is get their hands on Russians and be able to kill them.
Right.
But I think there also is an external message there. They're trying to embarrass Putin and Russia and say, look, you may be fighting inside Syria, or may claim that you're not, but we caught you in a lie. Look, your troops are still here. And also, I do think you're correct. I think an aspect, too, is they are trying to, I think the message may indeed be directed at the Russian population. Remember, the Russians took significant casualties in their in their Vietnam, which wound up being Afghanistan, and them hiding the casualties that they took inside of Afghanistan ultimately put an end to the occupation of Afghanistan.
One more Syria story. We're moving from the Islamic State, al-Baghdadi, to al-Nusra, al-Qaeda, Jaish al-Fatah, the Army of Conquest. They are reported by your colleague Tom Jocelyn gaining more ground in Aleppo province. That's a long-standing battle for Aleppo province, Aleppo city. Al-Nusra has been regarded as perhaps working close to the United States or the interests of the United States. Is there any indication that this al-Qaeda success is aided by U.S. air power, or are we far away from Aleppo province?
The U.S. is not conducting intensive airstrikes against the al-Nusra Front, which, as you stated, was al-Qaeda's official branch.
That's a very careful way of putting it, Bill. We're not attacking al-Qaeda.
Right, and or its allies. So the U.S. air campaign, there have been a handful, a sprinkling of strikes against the al-Nusra Front inside Syria, and particularly these have been directed against what the U.S. government calls the so-called Khorasan group.
Right.
And this is supposed to be the operatives, al-Qaeda operatives inside Nusra, who are assigned to attack the West.
Yeah, the old man al-Qaeda.
Exactly.
Right,
I mean,
right.
look, and making these distinctions by the U.S. is just really odd, particularly when the al-Nusra Front is designated as a global jihadist group by the U.S. government, and so they really are fair game. It's widely known to be al-Qaeda.
All right, Bill, I want to summarize here in Syria, because we're going to move on to Iraq and Yemen when we come back. The situation in Syria is that the U.S. has no discernible battle plan. We're not on the field, and any statement of success or failure is entirely untrustworthy, pretty much like the Spanish Civil War was in the 1930s. The advances by the fascists, the retreats by the communists, the participation by the Germans, participation by the Russians, all of that was believable or not. Bill, could we say that Syria right now is a totally non-transparent collapse? Bill?
I'm sorry, John, we had cut out there.
Yeah, could we say that Syria remains tonight a total non-transparent collapse? There is no clarity whatsoever on the battlefield.
Yeah, absolutely. Very, very little clarity. The Syrian government has had minimal success. It's it's Mad Max land with multiple competing groups.
Very well, John. So we'll get on to more Mad Max when we come back to Iraq. We're just doing an end of June, the first half of 2016, the Obama administration on its way out, the 45th president in the balance, Afghanistan, failure. Syria, failure. Thaddeus McCotter, WJR, the great voice of the Great Lakes, success. I'm John Batchelor.